Welcome back, students. We're going to continue exploring factoring and factoring trinomials. We're going to piggyback off our last lesson. Our last lesson had us factoring a trinomial where the coefficient of x squared was 1. Now we're going to have a coefficient in front of this x squared that is not 1. It's going to take a little more time and a few more steps, but you'll understand it and you'll do well. Here's a good example. 2x squared plus 2x plus 3x plus 3. So we have that, we can put this together, but I'm going to show you in this video how to factor trinomials that have a coefficient in front of x squared that is not 1. Before I show you that, I want to remind you of how we got the trinomial in the first place. So what I'm going to do is multiply this to get the trinomial and then show you how what we're going to do is basically do the process backwards to end up with this answer. Okay, so we would do the distributive property twice, or FOIL, and we would multiply 2x to x and get 2x squared. Then we would do 2x times 1, we would get 2x. Then we would do 3 times x and get 3x. Then we would do 3 times 1 and get 3. And then we would add the like terms in the middle to get this. So the process I am going to teach you is that we're going to take this and put it on the top, and we're going to try and find this, and I'm going to teach you a way to factor, so when you're done factoring, hey look, you will end up with this. Okay? Here we go. Alright, remember we said we'd write the answer that we got, the sum that we got at the by solving by the FOIL. We're going to write it at the top, okay, that's what we got, and what we're going to do is convert this sum back into a product. So the first thing I want you guys to do is write your first term and your last term. After you did that, next what I'd like you to do is we need to find the product of the first term multiplied to the last term. Okay, let's look at this. 2x squared multiplied to 3 is 6x squared. Now what we're going to do is list the factors of this. Alright, well the only factors I came up with are 1x times 6x is 6x squared, or 2x multiplied to 3x is 6x squared. Okay, we're going to take the factors that add up to 5x. 2x plus 3x adds up to 5x, and we're going to write them in the middle. Remember I told you we're going to basically do that work that we did on that other slide backwards. So that's what I did. I took 2x plus 3x, and that will give us 5x if we go back up the pyramid, okay? Alright, so that was that process. The next thing I'm going to teach you is something called factoring by grouping. And this is how we're going to convert this 4-term polynomial into a product. The way I want you to do it is put a parenthesis around the first two terms and put a parenthesis around the last two terms. Okay, do that right now. Now I would like you to factor this binomial. What can you divide? What can you pull out of this and this? So here's what I did. I know that I could divide this by 2x, and if I do that, an x remains. I also know if I divide this by 2x, a 1 remains. So I divided this binomial by 2x, and I factored it. Now I want you to do it to this binomial. What can you divide 3x and 3 by? So look, you can divide them both by 3. If you divide this by 3, the x stays, and if you divide this by 3, you get a 1. Notice how the blue parentheses match each other. If they don't, you did something incorrectly. So here, now I'm going to write my final answer. The way I write my two parentheses, my two binomials, my product, is I take the two red ones, the 2x and the plus 3, and I make a parentheses, and then I write my blue parentheses, and I write that only once. Here's my answer, right here. If you multiply this and work backwards, you will get that. This is my answer. All right, you remember that I said we were going to take the bottom of the last slide and put it at the top? Well, that's kind of what we're doing here. We're going to take the answer we got on one of the problems we did before, the product, and now it's a sum. We're going to take this sum and convert it back to a product. So what we're going to do first is write our first term and write our last term. So as you can see, I did that. Now, the next part, what we need to do is find the product, okay, find the product of the first term and the last term. So we're going to multiply 6n squared to 7. So yes, we're going to do this again. The only thing different now is, and I didn't point this out yet, is that our middle term is negative. So we'll just remember that when we list our factors. So let's list our factors of 42n squared. Okay, I listed the factors that multiply together to give me positive 42n squared. Well, I started with negative 1n multiplied to negative 42n. That works, but the only problem is if I add those together, I don't get my middle term, my negative 23n. So the one I circled is my answer, or the one I'm going to use, because what's negative 2n plus negative 21n? That will add up to negative 23n. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to write it as my middle terms. It's always a good idea to double check. So what's negative 2n plus negative 21n? Yes, it equals my middle term. So if I were to work up this way backwards, I would get the answer up here. Okay, so now remember what we do. We're going to put parentheses around the first two terms and the last two terms. Now notice what I'm doing here. I am including that negative sign. Now if you don't do that, you could do keep change change, but do remember that is a negative 21n. Okay, you look at your first binomial and you say, what can I divide 6 and 2 by? And the answer is 2. And then what can I divide, can I take an n from both of them? Yes, so I divided them both by 2n, and when I do that, what's left? 3n here, and 2n divided by 2n is minus 1n. I'm going to do the same thing again. Now, when I look at this, I'm just going to give you a heads up here. Remember, whatever's left here has to match this blue parentheses. And I notice that this blue parentheses goes positive, negative, but this goes negative, positive. So we're going to divide this by a negative 7. Watch what I do. So negative 21n divided by negative 7 gives me a positive 3n. Now it matches. A positive 7 divided by a negative 7 gives me a negative 1. It matches. You need these blue parentheses to match. Once again, last step, take your red numbers that you factored out and give them their own parentheses, and then take the blue parentheses and write it only once. Here is your answer. If you multiply this product together, you will get this sum up here. Let's do an example when C is negative. So remember what we do. We write our first term and we write our last term. Let's do that now. The next thing we do is we multiply the first term to the last term. So do that, and on the side write your product. Negative 7 multiplied to 5c squared is negative 35c squared. Here's where it gets a little tricky, because we have to list the factors of negative 35c squared that will add to negative 2c. I'll show you what I mean. Watch. Negative 1c multiplied to 35c does give me negative 35c squared, but if we add them together, we get 34c, and that's not what our middle is. So I'm going to keep going. Look at what I came up with here. Negative 7c multiplied to 5c does give me negative 35c, and you know what happens if I add those together? I get negative 2c. So I am going to take this and I'm going to write it. I'm going to write it right here. It's always good to double check. What's negative 7c plus 5c? That equals negative 2c. We're good to go. Okay, let's do what we've done before, factor by grouping. We're going to put a parentheses around this and put a parentheses around this. Let's go. Go ahead, hit pause and try and do this step yourself. Try and factor these both out. The only thing I could factor out of this first binomial is a c. They both have a c. So I divided by c and I put it on the outside, factored it out, and what's left? 5c minus 7. Now I have to factor this. Well, look it. This is 5c minus 7, and I can only divide those by 1. So the only number I can factor out of that is a 1. So that's what I'm going to do. So I divide them both by 1 and put my 1 here. I factored a 1 out, which didn't do anything, and let's check. Do these two green parentheses match? Yes, they do. So remember what we do. We take our red numbers and give them their own parentheses. Do that now. And write the green parentheses only once. There's my answer. I took a sum and I made it a product. I factored it. If you multiply these together, you will get the question that we started with. I invite you to hit pause and try this yourself. Okay, do that if you like, or continue to watch me and take notes on this one too. All right, here we go. What do we do first? Okay, we write the first term and we write the last term. Do that now. What do we do second? Do you remember? We multiply the first term to the last term and write it over here. Do that right now. 5x squared multiplied to negative 3x, multiplied to negative 3. Sorry about that. We get negative 15x squared. So remember, next step, third step, start listing the factors of this that might add up to positive 2x. Go ahead, start doing that. Hit pause. Okay, I listed all my factors. One of them has to be positive and one has to be negative, otherwise you don't get a negative product. But negative 1x plus positive 15x is 14x. It won't work. Here's my lucky one right here. Negative 3x plus positive 5x. If you add those together, you get 2x. That's my winner chicken dinner. This one will not work because if you add these together, you would get negative 2x. And this is positive, so we cannot use this one. Okay, so I take this and I write it for my middle term, and let's double check. What's negative 3x plus positive 5x? Correct, it's positive 2x, so it works. Remember the next step. If you want to hit pause and do the rest yourself, go for it. Otherwise, remember, we're going to put parentheses around the first two terms and then parentheses around the last two terms. And now start factoring. Say to yourself, what can you divide out of 5x squared and minus 3x squared? You can divide an x out. So if I divide an x from this, I'm left with 5x. If I take an x away from this minus 3x, all I have is a minus 3. Okay, now let's go over here. Now we look. We can only divide those by 1, and this matches. So, just like in the last example, the only thing I can factor out is a 1. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to divide them both by 1, and then I'm going to write what's left, which of course is 5x minus 3. Double check. Do these match? Good. Your last step, remember, is take the red terms that you wrote and give them their own parentheses. So x plus 1 will be my first binomial. Now I write my green parentheses only once, and I write it right here. Here's my answer. If I multiply x plus 1 to 5x minus 3, I will get the question I started with. Alright, students, you did a good job. What I want you to do are these 3 practice problems. Make sure you label them as practice problems. Please show all your work. Look at your notes if you need to. Follow the exact steps I did, and you're going to get them right. Bring any questions you have to class, and we can go over them, okay? Take care.